My name is Dana Keller. I'm 45, founder and CEO of Stratiform Data, a company I built from a single folding table and a 6-year-old laptop in Tempe, Arizona. Today, our systems manage real-time patient data for over 200 hospitals nationwide. I'm not someone people forget, at least not in boardrooms. The wedding took place last Saturday at Chandler Ridge, a converted vineyard estate outside Colorado Springs. It was my sister Melissa's big day. She was marrying Evan Langford, the only son of Roger Langford, chairman of the Cloverline Health Network. Cloverline had just signed a $40 million implementation contract with my company 2 months prior, a deal we closed after nearly a year of technical audits and board negotiations. I never mixed family with business, but this time the two had crossed naturally, or so I thought. I arrived early, wearing a slate grey sheath dress and bringing a gift Melissa had registered for, a crystal carafe with her new initials etched in script. The staff at the venue were polite, the guests warm, if somewhat rehearsed. When I approached the seating board at the reception tent, my eyes scanned for my name. It was there. Dana Keller, +1. Table 27. My hand froze. Table 27 wasn't in the main tent. It wasn't even near the overflow tables by the fountain. It was tucked around the back corridor, beyond the catering prep area, across from a utility closet and just beside the restrooms. A single table, no place card holders. The air back there smelled of floor cleaner and overripe flowers. I sat without a word. The music from the string quartet in the tent reached me faintly, as if from another world entirely. No one looked for me. No one seemed surprised I wasn't among the Langfords or the bridesmaids. I wasn't angry, at least not right away. What I felt was sharper, colder, and far more precise. And I didn't plan to stay seated for long. I sat there longer than I should have. Not because I was frozen or stunned or unsure what to do. It was deliberate, letting the moment settle around me, letting it crystallize. I found that silence, when chosen, has a way of amplifying what others would rather ignore. Across the tent, laughter rang out like tiny fractures in glass. My sister's voice, bright and exaggerated, lifted above the music. A perfect day curated to the inch. I could see her from my vantage point. She was doing that thing with her hands, over-explaining a joke, trying to manage perception. Evan stood beside her like a mannequin, all pressed linen and family legacy. They hadn't seen me. Or maybe they had, and looked away. That distinction no longer mattered. What mattered was how carefully this entire setup had been staged, down to my absence. This wasn't the first time I'd been edged out of the picture. It had happened in more subtle ways over the years. Missed invitations, quiet reshuffling of plans, introductions where my name was softened to something adjacent. Not CEO, not founder, Melissa's older sister out in Arizona working with tech or data or something. Always something vague. The distance had started small, almost imperceptible. A delayed text, a forgotten birthday, my mother asking if I still worked at that IT place, even after I'd made the cover of Healthcare Analytics Weekly. These weren't wounds exactly, not at the time. They were friction points, wear and erosion. What surprised me was not the seating, it was how expected it felt once it happened. 2 months ago, Cloverline Health Network reached out through their procurement division, inquiring about our real-time integration platform. At first it felt routine, RFP, demo, security audit. But when I saw the surnames in the internal approval list, I paused. Langford. The connection clicked. Still no one said a word. Not my sister, not Roger Langford, not their strategy officers. The deal moved forward on merit, not favour. That mattered to me. Our system had outperformed 2 competitors in response latency and audit compliance. We didn't win because of proximity. We won because we were better. I told myself that distinction insulated me. I should have known better. The final signature was barely dry when the wedding invitation arrived. I RSVP'd without hesitation. I booked a hotel, chose a dress that didn't stand out, but didn't disappear either. I brought someone, Noah, a partner from a DC firm I'd been seeing casually for a few months. It wasn't serious. He understood discretion, and he was used to navigating rooms where power disguised itself behind good manners. He hadn't seen the table placement yet. I hadn't told him. There was something clinical about the whole thing I wanted to observe alone, like watching an organism under a microscope before deciding whether or not to intervene. My phone buzzed against my clutch. A text from the Stratiform operations team, confirmation that the Phase 2 onboarding package had gone live for Cloverline, right on schedule. I opened my encrypted workspace and tapped through the back-end panel. 48 facilities had been activated. 6 were in staging. 1, oddly, had gone dark. I flagged it and set an alert. The dashboard glowed back at me like a mirror. It didn't blink. It didn't take offense. It simply worked. I closed the app and looked toward the main tent again. Someone was giving a toast, a long, sentimental one. Melissa was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Roger Langford laughed at something Evan whispered. Glasses clinked. I stood. Not quickly, just enough to shift the air. Noah hadn't come to find me. He wouldn't. That had been part of the agreement. Observe first, don't rescue. I walked slowly along the stone path bordering the tent. I passed clusters of guests in pastels, white wine glinting in the sunlight. No one looked up. I followed the sound of catering staff calling names and orders in tight whispers, making mental notes of who moved where. Logistics, after all, had always been my strength. Back near the main house, I entered the restroom, locked the stall, sat down. Not because I needed to. It was the most private place I could find. I reviewed everything I'd seen. The seating wasn't an error. The table was deliberate, not just in placement, but in isolation. I was not meant to be seen. But someone had forgotten something. I was not just Melissa's sister. I was now a vendor, a stakeholder, a contractual entity. I had entered this family not through blood, but through systems integration. There are moments when decisions begin forming long before you realize you've made them. This was one. It didn't hit like a revelation. It layered itself quietly, accumulating shape as I thought through next steps. By the time I left the restroom, the plan had structure. I wouldn't react. I would initiate. There's a difference. Outside, the light had softened. The cocktail hour was ending. Noah spotted me and raised his glass slightly from across the garden. I returned the gesture, then turned back toward the service wing. I needed one call. Not to a lawyer, not yet. That would come later. I called Ari from my implementation team. Left a message framed as a standard compliance inquiry. Audit access logs from the Langford cluster, flag anomalies in internal routing, and prepare a temporary rollback sequence under contingency protocol. I didn't say why. I didn't need to. Ari had worked with me long enough to trust my timing. I returned to table 27 before anyone noticed I'd gone. The air still smelled of bleach and sugar roses. I poured a glass of water, sat straight, waited. I wasn't interested in causing a scene. That's the mistake most people make when they think they've been slighted. They perform their pain so visibly that it becomes easy to ignore. I've learned a better way. Stay calm, stay factual, and never interrupt the other side while they're revealing exactly who they are. By the time the reception formally began, the sun had started to dip behind the ridge. Shadows lengthened across the lawn, and chandeliers flickered to life inside the canopy of the main tent. Music shifted from strings to soft jazz, and guests filtered into their assigned places with the precision of a well-rehearsed production. My table remained where it had always been, removed, static, and barely within earshot. No one approached, no one stumbled upon it by mistake. That, in itself, said enough. I had returned there not to sulk, not to brood, but because it was exactly where I needed to be. Visibility can be a weapon when used correctly. Invisibility, even more so. Noah joined me eventually. His expression was unreadable, the kind of look that understood something unspoken had already happened. He didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer explanations. We exchanged glances, measured in their silence, and resumed the ritual of polite sips and hollow bites. The steak was cold by the time the server found us. That, too, felt symbolic. From our position, I could see the head table clearly, lit in warm tones raised ever so slightly above the rest. Melissa was radiant in the way that brides are supposed to be, though there was something overly curated in her every movement. Evan played the role well, laughing when prompted, pausing for photographs, nodding at men he would later call mentors over Scotch and legacy portfolios. Roger Langford was the true nucleus of the space. Guests leaned into him, not out of affection, but deference. His shoulders bore the quiet arrogance of men who had long since stopped asking for anything and only received. I observed the way servers time their passes around him, how the wedding planner never faced him directly, always at an angle. He was used to control. So were many men I had worked with. I filed it away. As the evening continued, something shifted. There was an announcement, followed by applause. A video montage played, childhood photos, family vacations, and a sizzle reel of Melissa and Evan's courtship, edited with corporate-level polish. I wasn't in a single frame. Not as a child, not as a sister, not even in the group shot from last Thanksgiving, which I remember distinctly because I'd flown in early to help with catering. This, too, had been scrubbed clean. Not with malice, perhaps, but with intention. I excused myself again, this time under the guise of fresh air. No one noticed. I moved around the perimeter of the reception space, observing details, staff pacing, the location of the AV equipment, which devices were networked, who held access cards to which doors. I noted where the planners huddled with clipboards, where the waitstaff stashed unused place settings, where the florist's team left crates of unplaced centerpieces. People think weddings are emotional. I've always found them architectural. Back in the hallway behind the tent, I paused near the catering service entrance. Voices carried through the cracked door. Logistics, substitutions, someone requesting fresh ice buckets. A name floated out, Langford Table 2. Special dietary instructions, extra chilled wine. A server repeated it twice, then asked if the bride had signed off. She had. The structure was intact, but within that structure, every hierarchy was visible. Some names travelled farther, some needs were met faster. I checked the time. My contingency alert from earlier had triggered. One facility still dark. I tapped into the Stratiform portal discreetly, toggled a secondary authentication path and found the source. A misrouted credential. Nothing critical, but timely. I made no calls, I made no corrections. By the time I returned to the tent, the sky had gone fully dark. String lights lit the walkways like veins, glowing gold along gravel paths. Toasts had begun, first the best man, then my father, then Melissa herself. I listened from the edge, glass in hand, absorbing phrases about unity and family and building a future. I nodded when appropriate. I didn't smile, but I appeared polite. That distinction matters. Someone waved me over. A distant cousin, I think, or one of Evan's law school acquaintances. I approached, lingered just long enough to be seen, then excused myself again. My presence was fluid, intentional, like smoke. Near the bar, I overheard snippets of a conversation about data implementation timelines. Cloverline had apparently expedited their integration schedule, citing confidence in the vendor's agility. Roger, it seemed, had been boasting. My name was not mentioned. Not once. There's a peculiar satisfaction in knowing more than the room around you. Not in a condescending way, but in the quiet, procedural sense of watching a machine you built run without its engineers realizing the engineer is still present. I checked my watch again. An hour until the reception reached its closing bracket. That's when the donors would drift out and the younger crowd would take over. The energy would shift. Protocols would loosen. And Roger Langford, confident that all optics had been maintained, would relax. I returned to my seat and asked for a fresh glass of sparkling water. The server looked surprised, as if unsure whether this table still required service. She complied, then moved quickly away. I sipped, watching condensation pool along the linen. Across the room, I saw Melissa tilt her head and whisper something into Evan's ear. His eyes followed her gaze to the far corner, to where I sat. Our eyes didn't meet, but there was an unspoken acknowledgement in the glance. A subtle tightening of his jaw, a quick breath. The kind of micro-expression someone shows when they realize they've forgotten to account for one variable. I held his gaze just long enough. Then I looked away. Whatever was going to happen next would not come with raised voices or broken glasses. It would arrive calmly, methodically, as most irreversible things do. I had no interest in confrontation. What I required was understanding. And sometimes the only way to be understood is to act in a language the other side cannot ignore. The music shifted again, this time to a slower rhythm. The dance floor filled with predictable pairings. Someone called out for a group photo. A flash went off. Laughter followed. I remained seated, and somewhere within that quiet space between being seen and being remembered, the shape of what came next began to form. When the final course was cleared and the lights inside the tent shifted to a warmer hue, the rhythm of the evening softened into something more casual. Laughter became louder, coats were draped over chairs, ties loosened. The structure that had framed the event all day, orderly, curated, precise, began to erode gently around its edges. That was the moment I had been waiting for. I rose from my seat without urgency. The path to the centre of the tent wound through dancing guests and servers balancing trays of espresso martinis. It felt like walking through a set. Everyone performing roles they'd rehearsed, oblivious to the edges fraying around them. Roger Langford stood near the stage, surrounded by executives I recognised from Cloverline's board. Men and women in cocktail attire, mid-laugh, mid-pitch, mid-calculation. Their conversations hovered around merger opportunities, AI potential, alt and cross-platform integration. I waited patiently, invisible as I had been all evening, until I wasn't. I didn't speak. I didn't gesture. I simply made eye contact with Roger as the band wound down a slow jazz number. Something passed between us, something small but sufficient. He offered a brief nod, then motioned for one of the board members to excuse themselves. I walked with him to a quieter corner near the AV booth, out of earshot but still within view of the crowd. From a distance, we might have looked like two professionals exchanging pleasantries. No urgency, no heat. I opened the Stratiform mobile console and initiated a staged rollback protocol on the Langford Facility Group. 21 hospitals, live systems. The action would trigger an automatic escalation to Cloverline's IT leadership within 2 minutes. I authorized it using biometric confirmation. No dramatics, just workflow. Then I turned and rejoined the event. The consequences unfolded in waves, slow at first, like a tremor too soft to register, then growing. A man in a navy blazer, one of Cloverline's senior operations leads, checked his phone, froze mid-sentence and stepped away. Moments later, another received a ping, eyes widening before quickly pulling someone aside. Then 3 more, then 5. The murmur reached the tent's perimeter like a ripple. I watched them move, small huddles forming, dissolving, reforming, like ants reacting to an unseen breach in the nest. Roger's calm exterior began to strain. He motioned for someone across the room, then leaned in to speak low and fast. His voice didn't rise, but his gestures tightened. The wedding planner's assistant approached him hesitantly, likely unsure whether to ask about the dessert service or excuse herself altogether. He dismissed her with a flick. Melissa was still on the dance floor, caught mid-spin in a slow dance with Evan, unaware that the gravity in the room had shifted. When the best man attempted to pull Evan aside, Melissa resisted for a moment, visibly confused, then acquiesced with a forced smile. The song ended. The lights didn't, but something colder began to settle. I returned to table 27. My glass of water was as I had left it. The condensation had gathered at the base, forming a neat ring on the linen. Noah had vanished, but not without leaving a small folded card on my chair. We're good. He knew. Guests began checking their phones more frequently. Someone whispered something about a breach, another about an integration halt. None of them said my name. They wouldn't. Not yet. Not until someone high enough in Cloverline's structure forced the pieces together. And even then, they wouldn't say it publicly. Roger exited the tent with 2 board members and a man I recognized from the Cloverline incident response team. His gait was clipped, controlled. Evan followed moments later, a hand pressed to his earpiece, face pale. A photographer tried to catch a candid. He waved her away sharply. Inside the tent, the music faltered, just slightly. Enough for those paying attention to notice. The servers stalled. The energy bled out of the room like slow-moving fog. People began to whisper more openly now. The volume didn't rise, but the tone shifted. Melissa looked around as if searching for a cue that had been missed. She smiled at guests with that glazed look brides wear when their script is unraveling, but the cameras are still on. She didn't know yet, but she would. I stayed seated. Within the hour, Stratiform's legal division would receive a notice of concern from Cloverline's general counsel. I had already instructed our firm to route such communication through my office directly. I wasn't severing the contract, not yet, but the leverage had been repositioned, quietly, completely. Outside, I could see Roger on a phone call. He paced with the sharp, angular motion of someone trying to manage optics and damage simultaneously. the kind of pacing that precedes a very public statement framed as unexpected technical delays. Back inside, the cake cutting was delayed, then cancelled. The DJ switched to a pre-approved playlist. The crowd thinned, no one danced. Small children ran unsupervised between tables, their laughter unfiltered, unaware of the adult calculus surrounding them. Melissa's face changed when she returned from a brief conversation with her new father-in-law. She didn't cry, but she stopped smiling. She sat down hard at the head table, eyes scanning the room. She found me. I didn't look away. A waiter came by and offered more water. I declined. My glass was still half full. There was no need to refresh what had never been consumed. By midnight, most of the guests had either left or excused themselves quietly to hotel shuttles. A few lingered, pretending to be too drunk to notice the silence. The planner walked with a clipboard, trying to salvage the timeline. Her steps were faster now, more clipped. No one came to confront me. No one raised their voice. There were no scenes, no accusations, just adjustments, discreet, urgent, logistical. The kind that happen when an operation's foundation has been disturbed from within. I stayed until the lights dimmed. Then I stood, collected my clutch, and walked back past the main tent, down the gravel path and toward the valet station. The evening air had cooled. The breeze carried the scent of lilies and burnt wax. The driver opened the door. I stepped inside. The wedding would still be remembered, just not for the reasons it was planned. 3 days after the wedding, I returned to Arizona. The flight was quiet, the descent smooth. Phoenix welcomed me with dry heat and silence. Familiar, unjudging. I unpacked slowly, hung the slate-grey dress at the back of my closet and slid the unused wedding card into the drawer beside my passport. I didn't review the photos, I didn't delete them either. Work resumed as it always had, uninterrupted. At Stratiform, nothing shifted on the surface. Our Monday morning operations meeting opened at 9 sharp. Our engineers deployed patches by noon. Our compliance team flagged 2 minor irregularities in a facility in Missouri. I approved a travel request for our East Coast director. From the outside, it was as if nothing had happened, but the undertone was different. The language people used shifted. Where there had been caution, there was clarity. Where there had been distance, there was alignment. My name came up more frequently in executive-level meetings, even when I wasn't present, not in reverence, but in reference. Referenced not as a cautionary tale, but as precedent. Within a week, Cloverline issued a public-facing update on their patient integration system. They used the phrase temporary redundancy protocols to describe the rollback. In a single paragraph near the bottom, Stratiform was commended for maintaining critical compliance integrity under real-time stress conditions. No signatures, no direct attributions, just enough language to shift the narrative. My inbox changed subtly. People who had once replied with 3-word acknowledgements began adding lines of context. Invitations started arriving, not from marketing departments, but from strategy heads. A think tank in DC asked me to consult on a healthcare data ethics panel. An executive at a competing firm forwarded me a research brief with a note about cross-sector intelligence opportunities. A professor from MIT sent a request to interview me for a case study on integrity architecture. I accepted none of them immediately. I let them sit. I read them each once, then archived them without response. Not from arrogance, but from caution. Sometimes the echo of a storm takes longer to clear than the storm itself. Melissa didn't call. Not that I expected her to, but 2 weeks later a thin envelope arrived. No return address, just a Colorado postmark. Inside was a handwritten note, short, unsigned. No apologies, no confessions, just a single sentence. I think I misunderstood what mattered. I folded the note at once and placed it in the same drawer as the card. I didn't reply. Some acknowledgements are meant to remain unfinished. By early fall, Stratiform's quarterly review exceeded projections. Our new clients included 2 hospital systems that had originally shortlisted Cloverline's internal team. When asked why they chose us, both cited organizational discipline and predictable accountability. In boardrooms, language like that lands softly. But I could hear what they meant. Noah and I saw each other a few more times, mostly over coffee or brief dinners that ended before midnight. He never asked about the wedding, nor I about his silence during it. There's a particular grace in people who don't demand explanations. Eventually we drifted amicably, as people do when no unfinished business lingers. Autumn came quickly. I found myself working later, though not from obligation. There was something calming in watching the office empty, then rebuilding its silence on my terms. I rearranged the common area, ordered new chairs for the reception lobby, approved a mural design from a local artist for the east-facing wall. Small things, measurable, tactile. One afternoon, the head of implementation paused outside my door after a check-in meeting. He didn't say much, just that his team had been talking, that they appreciated how I steered us through the Langford thing. I nodded once. He left. A month later, I received an invitation to a closed-door symposium on enterprise trust modelling. Not a conference, not a networking event, a room of 20, location undisclosed until the day prior. I RSVP'd, not because I needed affirmation, but because it felt like the right next question to ask. The night before the trip, I stood by the window of my home, lights off, holding a cup of black tea that had long gone cold. Outside, a neighbour's dog barked once, then went quiet. Somewhere beyond the cul-de-sac, wind scraped dry leaves across pavement. There was no epiphany, no inner monologue, just quiet, a quiet I had earned. And in that quiet, the air felt still enough to begin again. It was early spring when the invitation came, an embossed card tucked inside a nondescript envelope, the kind reserved for occasions that still believed in ceremony. The return address was from my undergraduate alma mater, where I hadn't set foot in over 2 decades. The occasion was their annual Founders Forum, a gathering of alumni across disciplines who had, as the letter politely phrased it, demonstrated exceptional resilience and innovation in professional leadership. I read it twice. Then a third time. I remembered those sandstone halls, the smell of varnished books, the silence of long hallways on cold mornings. I hadn't been a notable student, not then. Steady, yes, disciplined, but not the type anyone predicted would return as a name printed on their letterhead. I didn't accept right away. I waited a week, maybe out of caution, maybe because part of me wasn't sure I belonged in the version of myself they'd constructed. But eventually I said yes, not for validation, but for completion. The event was modest, wood-panelled auditorium, rows of navy cushions, a podium lit by a narrow spotlight. The air smelled of pine cleaner and old books. There were maybe 70 in attendance, students, faculty, a few board members, several guests from the local business community. Nothing grand, but something intentional. I spoke for 15 minutes. No notes, no slides. Just a quiet recollection of building Stratiform from a folding table and a second-hand laptop, of structuring trust into code, of setbacks that didn't come with flashing lights, but with closed doors and silent omissions. I didn't mention Melissa, or Cloverline, or that wedding. But I didn't need to. The room heard it anyway, in the pauses, in the phrasing, in the places where my voice didn't waver but chose stillness. Afterward, a student approached me and asked how you know when something is worth holding your ground for. I didn't offer a formula. I just said that time has a way of proving what noise can't. When I returned home, I found my office had left a sealed package on my desk. Inside was a first-run copy of the MIT case study. The title was blunt: Distributed Trust and Executive Equilibrium, the Dana Keller Framework. I skimmed the first few pages. It was accurate, technical, measured. At the back there was an acknowledgement, based on anonymized operational review of strategic leadership during institute stress events. I smiled faintly. A long way to say she saw it coming and held the line. Weeks passed, then months. Recognition arrived, as it sometimes does, without the fireworks people expect. A quiet uptick in consulting requests, a new advisory role, anonymous citations in white papers, and more students writing in, not for internships, but for perspective. I answered most of them, not with strategy, but with questions. I found that asking is more durable than telling. That clarity doesn't always arrive with certainty, but sometimes with the simple act of being able to choose your next step freely. In April, I hosted a small dinner for my senior team, just 12 of us. No agenda, no announcements, just shared space. We talked about nothing critical: books, food, travel. At the end of the night, as people trickled out into the Arizona dusk, I stayed behind to clear the glasses. I didn't mind. The quiet afterward felt earned. Later that night, I stood in the kitchen alone, lights low, shoes off, holding a glass of water that had long since gone warm. And I realized something I hadn't said aloud. not in speeches or articles or boardrooms. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to be seen without having to explain my presence. To walk into a room without first shrinking to fit it. To let the facts of my work speak not over me, but with me. And now they did. Justice hadn't arrived with headlines, but it had settled in, slow and firm, like a foundation poured quietly at night, measured, level, and built to last. There is a kind of peace that comes not from being heard, but from knowing you needed to raise your voice to begin with. Sometimes the most powerful changes don't arrive with noise or applause. They unfold in silence, in a pause before a decision, in the way someone finally looks you in the eye after looking past you for years, or in a moment when you realize you no longer need to explain who you are. Dana's story isn't about revenge. It's about remembering your value, even when others forget. About trusting the work you've done, the ground you've stood on, the clarity you held when things became unclear. She didn't shout, didn't demand. She didn't need to. Her presence was enough. Her choices were deliberate. And the world eventually adjusted to that truth. What happens when we stop waiting for permission to be seen and simply stand where we belong? Not all justice is loud. Sometimes it arrives like a tide, slow, sure, and irreversible. Thank you for listening to this story. If it stayed with you even just a little, perhaps ask yourself, what have you built in silence that deserves to be seen? We'll see you in the next one.